Hi friends. There's a lot of great plant ID books out there, but one thing that is often missing in them that I wish was there is how to identify some of these plants by their winter stalks. Knowing the winter stalks gives you food later in the year because you can start to see, oh, there's a patch of monarda, there's a patch of wild carrot. And as you start to recognize that, then you can come back later in the year, mark it down in your mind, on your GPS app, in your journal, and then you know, hey, this is where I'm going to come back later on for cherries, for ground beans, whatever it is. But in this, I would like to share with you some of my favorite dry winter stalks to look for and give you some pretty in-depth ID and a little hint of what they're used for. If you're going to add these to your diet, just learn about them, how to ID them in the summer. Primarily we're learning the winter form so that we know the area to come back to later on. And then if we can ID the summer, the regular green growing form, you're golden, and you can add these into your stews, your soups, your salads. This one you're going to find in the forest, but also in fields, at the edge of fields, and it's called ground bean. Look at the way that this wraps around. It's a really thin vine. Sometimes it's going to have these ghost-like leaves. Here's more of it. Your eye might be able to start to pick it out. Here it is running along here. There's those ghosty leaves. Here it is again, twining up around this little sapling. Often it's going to make a mess. See this? It looks really tangled. Other times it might be quite beautiful. Wrapping up, twining around this. And a lot of times you're going to see it just come down and disappear into the snow. The ground bean is a great one to know because right away in the spring, if you remember where those are, as soon as the ground thaws, you can dig down, and those ground beans that are down beneath the soil are going to be at their prime. You might know cherry by its, some people call it potato chippy bark, the way it flakes off like this. But there is another way that you can identify cherry. It's very evident in the wintertime. And once you know it, you just will never mistake it, and you'll be able to quickly ID cherry trees. Of course, then if you remember where those are, come late summer, you're going to have some cherries to enjoy. Here it is. This is called black knot fungus. You may have seen this before. It's very distinctive. And almost every cherry tree you meet is going to have a little bit of this growing on it. I've been trying with the forest monks to find a good use for this. See if it works as a fire starting material. But so far, nothing. But it does identify these cherry trees, especially if you're not familiar with the young cherry trees. Again, just gives you that little secret extra bit of knowledge so that next season, you're ready. Here we're standing in front of a whole bunch of goldenrod. Let's get up closer. We're going to see this, I don't know, bronzy kind of stalk. It always feels kind of sharp. When you run your fingers down it, right along the edges here, there's some really sharp little points. So it has a prick, prick, prick feeling as you go down. Of course, it's going to have its distinctive goldenrod tops. But remember, those come in a lot of different shapes. But in general, we're going to be looking for that fuzziness. It looks like it would make a really good tinder. And often, almost always, you're going to see some dried leaves. These, incidentally, are also good tinder material if you're making a tinder bundle. But in the spring, these guys are going to start growing again from the ground, and up they come. These are wild edible. They're not the best green in the world, but you can take the leaves. Some have different kind of a sweeter flavor than others, but you can add them to extend your horta, which is your steamed greens. Another curious thing about the goldenrod, so here's one that doesn't really, it has a couple leaves, but it's been broken off. right above this weird round thing. What is that? When we look on this side, there's a hole in it. So if it does not have a hole, especially in early winter, before somebody else has gotten it before you, there's a little white grub in there. And that grub you can eat raw if you want to. It's a little work to get into it because these are fairly strong. But once you get in there, the grub is very sweet because it has impregnated all of its cells with sugar, essentially, and antifreeze that to us tastes very sweet. This is also another great way to ID goldenrod. So you're looking for the leaves, you're looking for those tops, but you're also looking for these little galls. Yet another distinctive aspect of the goldenrods. Sometimes you're going to get these little bunches of leaves. Again, this is the work of an insect, creating essentially a gall. But if you see those, another sign that you are in the territory of some goldenrod. Doing that finger test where I reach down, out, poke, poke, poke. It's not terrible, but it's just a slight prick. That again gives me that sign that this is goldenrod. All right, I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite plants, Monarda. This is another one that's pretty easy to recognize in the winter. Looking at it right here, look how distinctive this is. See that? Yeah, those are the old flower heads where the seeds have emerged. And a couple ways to know that you've found the right plant. First of all, this has a square stem. Can you see that? It's because it's in the mint family. And when you try to roll it in your fingers, it won't roll because it has these square sides. You're also going to see that it has this opposite branching pattern. See that? Comes right out opposite itself from the stem. Now, that one, going to be tougher to see. And remember, when you're checking for opposites, sometimes they break off or just never formed. Here are the leaves. And these leaves, remarkably enough, they have such a potent oil content that even in the winter, you can often taste the oil. I'm going to try one. Yeah, that's remarkable. So it still has a strong flavor. Nothing like in the spring or summer when this can be, whoa, kind of knock your socks off. And the flavor is, I'm not sure how to describe it, but it's very strong. It makes a great tea. People use it medicinally, but you can just make a tea out of it that is delicious. When these flower, they're going to have these long purple flower petals essentially on them. You can pull those off, add them to a salad, and they not only deliver an incredible flavor and goodness, but they also make the salad just beautiful. So as you start to learn to ID this in the winter, as with all of these, you know where to come later in the year to find your Monarda. So this, we're looking at wild carrot, sometimes called Queen Anne's lace, and some distinctive characteristics to look for. See these starbursts on the top? It's kind of like frozen fireworks. And typically these are going to grow up in a cup shape, almost like you could set something down inside of there. So that little cup, and sometimes you're going to find a bunch of seeds in there. We'll see if we can find one of those. But look, this is it too. Here it's growing more closed together. You don't really see the cup. And here it might be difficult to say, oh, is that the same plant? Because it's not really creating that cup at all. Oh, good. Here's those seeds. See those in there? All those little fuzzy seeds. That is the wild carrot seed. Here's the stem. It has kind of distinctive long longitudinal black lines that run up it a lot of the time. And often just looks kind of dirty. Doesn't have that bronzish, burnished look that some of our other winter stalks do. Remember that this one can be mistaken for hemlock, which is one of our most toxic plants So you really do have to be careful in the ID. I would highly recommend Samuel Thayer's book. I'll post the name of it right here. And that will give you a flawless guide to making sure that you can identify both of the plants and be really confident about which one you are meeting. Down beneath here in the spring, just as the name implies, there's going to be a white, not yellow or orange, but a white carrot-shaped root. And it's edible. It's not, you're not going to get tons of meat on it. It's not like a cultivated carrot, but this does grow in profusion usually. So when you find a couple of these, you're usually going to find tens or hundreds of them. And then by pulling them up, especially in that early spring soil, you can get roots that have a lot of nutrition and are pretty good to add to a soup or stew. The other edible part of this is the young shoots. And you can also find information on how to harvest that in Samuel Thayer's book. Here's some really tiny examples. You're not seeing the fireworks up there. You do see a couple of the seeds caught inside, but this is more unusual. In any group of them, you're usually going to see a couple of the distinctive regular cups. Here's kind of an interesting one, and this isn't a winter stalk, but a leaf. What is this from? Look at those. See those lines? How pronounced they are? Almost looks like, well, if you've ever eaten a tamale, almost looks like the wrapping of a tamale. And that is because it is the wrapping of a tamale. So this is a corn leaf. And why would you be interested in knowing a corn leaf? Well, I have found these in the woods, up in trees. They're going to blow during windstorms in the autumn and in the beginning of winter out into the woods. Now, if you know where the prevailing winds are coming from, that's often going to tell you the direction where there is a cornfield or was a cornfield. And those cornfields, if you are, let's say, a bow hunter and you're doing some late season hunting, like you can do here in Wisconsin in January, say, it's going to give you a clue of some of those good areas where the deer are still going because they can get some corn from the fields, and you might get yourself some venison for the table. And of course, fields, and those field edges where field and forest meet, are also the places where you're going to find a lot of the plants that we're covering here. For instance, that wild carrot. When you go and follow wherever that corn leaf might have come from, you're going to find that field edge and a place where there's a lot more plants waiting for you. Look at this beauty. This is a super distinctive plant. The stem of this one, Amaranth, has kind of a reddish, burnt reddish hue to it and distinctive lines. But this is easier to ID because of its seeds. Look at this. When we get close up, you can see all these little seeds in there that are contained in a nice little package. These seeds can be winnowed, and you're going to start, there's one right here. These seeds of the amaranth can be used even here in the winter as a cereal grain. These are very small ones that we have in the north, but they have a nice little crunch. Sometimes you just add them to the top of, well, whatever you're eating, a quinoa or oatmeal or whatever it is. The chaff of these is just not going to be very appetizing, but if you squish them up in your hand, I can't really do it one-handed here very well, but squish them up in your hand and let the wind or your gentle breath blow away the chaff, you'll be left with some seeds in your hand. Another way to recognize this, these little teeny tufts that come off along the stem. And you're often going to see this. This is where the seeds have been stripped away, and it leaves those distinctive little tufts. Amaranth, which you will also hear referred to as pigweed sometimes, is also an awesome green. And it's a green that you can start eating right away in the spring and carries through into late summer. It's somebody, who was that? argue that it was maybe one of the most nutritious greens in the world. That might have been Rob Greenfield. And it definitely packs a punch nutritionally, and it's delicious. We typically add it to our hortas and our soups and stews. Sometimes raw in a salad if it's really young. How's this one? This one is pretty easy to remember. For kids, we often say, hey, this is the one that has little peeled bananas on it. See all those peeled bananas? This is evening primrose. And earlier in the year, well here, let's take a look up here. Here's one that's not quite as peeled. Sometimes there will be some seeds in there. Each of these contains hundreds of these little seeds. These seeds are a source of a nutrient that can be difficult to get otherwise. I will post it right here since it's not in my mind. And early in the winter, you can tip these upside down, get a whole bunch of those seeds. They're not going to add calories to your diet. There's not a lot to them, but you sprinkle them on and you just get a little nutrition boost. This one, similar to the goldenrods, has kind of a poke, poke, poke as you move down the stem. It's a round stem with all kinds of little pokies on it. All right, I'm up against the hoop house here. This one you've heard me talk about, doubtless, especially if you've written to me about doing hand drill. These are the dried winter stalks of the Jerusalem artichoke. They're going to be a bit like bamboo. So you're going to see these nodes all along it. And as you go up, you're going to start to get some opposite branching coming off. You can see up close that the stalk has little teeny kind of bumps. They're almost little mini hairs on it. And that's a way to ID it. When I move my finger along it, it has a sandpapery feeling. Up on the top, you're going to have these little bundles. They're not going to look like much except a mess. But when you see that little mess, you have a good clue that you might be on to Jerusalem artichoke. We're looking at a beautiful hand drill spindle here. Nice and straight. Perfect thickness. But another reason to look for these is that down below there are going to be your sunchokes, your Jerusalem artichokes. These are one of the closest things we can get to the fabled wild potato. If they are growing in loose soil, they can be fairly large and they are rather potato-like. You cook them up. If you eat them raw, you will get a lot of gas. So cook them up and they make a wonderful addition that's going to add calories and nutrition to whatever you're making. So casserole, again, soups, stews. Add it to any kind of a bake that you're doing. They're awesome and abundant. When you dig down through the ground, you're going to find tons of them. These seem to benefit from being dug up. You won't diminish their population by digging them up. Once they're started somewhere, it's almost impossible to get them not to grow there. If you leave even a little chunk of the root down there in the ground, which inevitably happens, that will grow into a whole new plant come spring. A wonderful edible friend. And here we have a prime wild edible. This is milkweed. We're going to recognize it by a gray stalk that often has this mottling in it. See, it almost ranges from white to gray to black. Not often going to see much in the way of leaves. There's the remnants of one. There's one that's dried up. But I see these bare more often than having any leaf remnants on them. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll actually have the seeds in there. This is going to be easy to ID because it looks like fish scales. Beneath the fish scales is going to be the distinctive white fluff. But more often than not, those seeds have taken flight. And instead you're going to have this kind of golden yellow interior. Sometimes there won't be any pods on there at all left. But when that is happening, you're often going to have these little bloops, these little round tips. See that? Milkweed delivers one of the best cordages that we can get. It's going to peel right off of there, and you can reverse wrap that into a great cordage. If you take a stalk and you break it up, it's going to give you cordage for a tinder bundle and some really nice starter wood for a fire. And of course, this is an awesome wild edible. If you're afraid of it or you've heard bad things about it, go to Samuel Thayer's website, Forager's Harvest, and you can learn all about milkweed and how to prepare it. It's an edible that will last you all through the summer season. You see these stalks, you know where to go find it come spring. All right, my friends, thanks for coming with me through field and forest, and I hope that you enjoyed some of these. Go out, see if you can find some yourself, and learn more. You can mark some stalks that are unrecognizable to you, and then come back in the spring and the summer and see what is that plant. Often you can then add to your repertoire of what you know as far as winter stalks, and that's just going to extend your knowledge of nature and add a lot of wild edibles to your plate. Share any of your favorite winter stalks in the comments, and love to you all.